The heavy leather of my own dining room chair felt cold against my back. I sat perfectly still watching the chaos unfold in my house. Atlanta was sweltering outside, but the real heat was right here in this room. My son Andre shoved a stack of silk shirts into a massive Louis Vuitton suitcase. He was sweating, shifting his weight from foot to foot like a man who owed money to the wrong people. He was 36 years old, but he still could not look me in the eye. "Hurry up," Andre Kendra snapped, tossing a pair of designer heels onto the mahogany table. "We are going to miss the flight, and I'm not spending another minute in this dusty old museum." Kendra was a nightmare dressed in fake pearls and entitlement. She strutted around my dining room, treating my home like a cheap motel. She did not care that I bought this house with 40 years of sweat on the loading docks. She only cared about the Vegas trip, the bright lights, and the distance she could put between herself and me. "I am packing as fast as I can," Andre mumbled, zipping the bag with a violent tug. "Just make sure the old man knows the rules before we leave." I did not say a word. I just watched them. I'm 68 years old, and I've managed logistics for the biggest freight companies on the eastern seaboard. I know how to read a room, and I know when a ship is sinking. Andre was sinking. His designer clothes could not hide the panic in his hands. "Listen to me, old man," Kendra said, marching right up to my chair. She leaned down, her expensive perfume burning my nose. "We are going to Vegas for 2 weeks. We need a break from babysitting you. You sit here, you eat the meals I prepped, and you do not touch the thermostat." I looked at her, keeping my face as hard as a brick wall. I did not need a babysitter. I had a portfolio of commercial real estate and offshore accounts that they knew nothing about. I let them live here to help Andre get on his feet. Instead, they took over my house, acting like they were the landlords, and I was the charity case. "Did you hear her, Pops?" Andre asked, finally glancing in my direction. "Just do what she says. We have a lot riding on this trip. I have some meetings, some big investments in Vegas. I need a clear head." Investments, I thought to myself. The boy did not know the difference between a mutual fund and a slot machine, but I kept my mouth shut. I wanted to see how far they would take this disrespect. I wanted to let the rope play out to see if my own son would hang himself with it. In the corner of the room, sitting on the bottom step of the staircase, was my grandson. Jamal was 9 years old. He was small, quiet, and he had not spoken a single word in 4 long years. The doctors called it trauma. They said he stopped talking the day his grandmother died. The day my beautiful wife fell down those very stairs. Jamal hugged his knees to his chest, his wide eyes darting between his mother and me. He looked terrified. He always looked terrified when Kendra raised her voice. "Get your bags outside, Andre," Kendra ordered, clapping her hands like she was shooing away a dog. "The black car is waiting and the meter is running." Andre grabbed the heavy luggage, his knuckles turning white, and dragged them toward the front door. He did not offer a hug. He did not say goodbye. He just kept his head down and walked out, leaving me alone with the viper he married. Kendra stood up straight, looking around my dining room with a sneer of pure disgust. "God, I hate this place," she muttered. "It smells like old people and failure. As soon as we get back, we are making some serious changes around here. You hear me, Marcus? We are putting you in a home, and we are updating this dump." I felt a cold rage settle deep in my chest. She was standing in my house, threatening to throw me out, planning to spend money she did not earn. But a man of my experience does not throw a punch when a stare will do the job. I just looked at her, letting the silence stretch, letting it become heavy and uncomfortable. Whatever, Kendra scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Just stay out of trouble, and do not forget your medicine." She turned on her heel, her stilettos clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. She walked toward the kitchen, her hips swaying with a false confidence. The air in the room felt slightly cleaner the moment she walked away, but the tension was still thick enough to cut with a knife. I looked over at Jamal. He was still sitting on the stairs, frozen like a statue. I gave him a small, reassuring nod, trying to tell him that his grandfather was still in control. But Jamal did not nod back. He just stared at the kitchen door, his small hands gripping his knees so tight his fingers were white. Something was wrong. The disrespect was normal. The greed was normal. But the absolute terror radiating from my grandson was something new. The game was changing, and I needed to figure out the rules before the dice rolled. Kendra strutted back into the dining room holding a large glass jar. It was filled with dark, dried leaves. They looked like dirt swept from a dead forest floor. She placed the jar on the mahogany table, slamming it down with a loud clack. Her oversized fake diamond ring flashed in the chandelier light. She loved to flaunt that ring, acting like it was flawless, but I knew the truth. I knew Andre bought it on a credit card, drowning in 20% interest. Her wealth was an illusion, but her arrogance was very real. "Listen to me, Marcus," she commanded. She tapped her long acrylic nails against the glass jar. "This is the special herbal tea I bought for you. It cost a fortune, so do not waste it. You need to drink 1 cup of this every single night before bed. It will calm your nerves. It will help your old heart keep ticking while we are gone." I looked at the jar, and then I looked up at her face. Her smile was sharp, completely empty of any warmth. It was the smile of a predator circling a trapped animal. I did not reach for the jar. I just stared at the dark mixture. A faint metallic odor leaked from the lid, smelling like old pennies and bitter roots. "Are you deaf, old man?" she sneered. She leaned closer, her shadow falling across my face. "I said you drink it every night. Andre and I have a very important itinerary in Vegas. We are staying at a luxury suite, drinking champagne and rubbing elbows with rich people. We cannot be bothered with phone calls from the hospital just because you forgot to take care of yourself." Her fake wealth was a loud, obnoxious shield. It hid the pathetic fact that they lived under my roof, eating food paid for by my pension. She adjusted her designer knockoff bag on her shoulder, looking down her nose at me. "Promise me you will drink it," she demanded, her voice dropping into a dangerous, hissing tone. I kept my mouth shut. I did not give her the satisfaction of an argument. I had spent decades dealing with ruthless union bosses and corrupt port authority officials. I knew when a demand was a trap. I just slowly nodded, giving her a barely visible dip of my chin. I registered the insult and I filed it away in my mind. "Good," Kendra said, flipping her bleached hair over her shoulder. "See you in 2 weeks. Try not to burn the house down." She turned around and marched out the front door. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind her. The silence in the house was immediate, settling over the rooms like a thick, heavy blanket. The echo of her heels faded away. The only sound left was the steady ticking of the clock in the hallway. I let out a long, slow breath, feeling the tension drain from my tired shoulders. I was finally alone. But as I turned my head, I saw Jamal. He had crept up from the bottom stair, and he was standing right behind my chair. He was staring at the jar of tea on the table. His big brown eyes were wide, filled with a pure, unadulterated panic that made my blood run cold. He was trembling, shaking like a leaf caught in a violent storm. I had never seen the boy look so terrified. Not since the day we lost my Ruth. The heavy oak door clicked shut and the lock engaged. The silence of the big house pressed down on us. I looked at Jamal. He was standing right next to the mahogany table, staring at the glass jar of dark leaves. I reached out a hand, wanting to comfort the boy. "It is all right, Jamal," I said softly. "They are gone to Vegas. We can order some pizza and watch a baseball game tonight." Jamal did not move. His small hands reached out and he grabbed my wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong. He looked up at me and his brown eyes were filling with tears. His chest heaved as if he was struggling to breathe, and then he opened his mouth. "Do not drink it, Grandpa," he whispered. I froze, and the world stopped spinning. I stared at my 9-year-old grandson, unable to process the sound. He had not spoken a single word in 4 years. The doctors had told me that he might never speak again. "Jamal," I stammered, feeling my heart pound against my ribs. "You are talking." He squeezed my wrist harder, his voice shaking, but very clear. "Do not drink the tea," he said again, his voice growing a little louder. "Mommy told Daddy that it will make you sleep forever. She plotted it all. She said once you are gone, the big house is theirs." I felt a cold chill wash over my entire body. My own flesh and blood, my only son Andre, was plotting to kill me for an inheritance. I looked back at the jar of dried leaves. The metallic smell suddenly made absolute sense. It was not a herbal remedy. It was a death sentence in a glass jar. "Are you sure, Jamal?" I asked, dropping my voice to a dangerous whisper. "Are you absolutely sure about what you heard?" Jamal nodded his head and tears spilled down his cheeks. "She said she would send me away to an orphanage if I ever told you. She said she would do it just like she sent Grandma down the stairs." The dining room spun around me. My beautiful Ruth, the loose carpet runner on the stairs. It was not a tragic accident. Kendra had murdered my wife, and my son had helped cover it up to keep his comfortable life. I felt a darkness rise up inside me, a pure and cold fury that belonged to the man I used to be, the man who ruled the Atlanta logistics empire with an iron fist. I pulled Jamal into a tight hug, burying my face in his small shoulder. "I got you, son," I whispered fiercely into his ear. "Nobody is going to send you anywhere, and nobody's ever going to hurt us again." I pulled back, and I looked him dead in the eye. I needed to see the truth with my own eyes. I needed absolute proof before I burned their entire world to the ground. "Go to the kitchen, Jamal," I ordered calmly. "Bring me the hot kettle and bring me a mug." Jamal ran to the kitchen, his bare feet slapping against the hardwood floor. He came back quickly carrying the hot kettle and my favorite ceramic mug. I took them from his hands, and my own hands were perfectly steady now. The tremor of old age was gone. The predator inside me had finally woken up. I opened the glass jar and I scooped a handful of the dark leaves into the mug. I poured the boiling water right over them. The liquid instantly turned a vile, inky black color. The smell of bitter roots and old pennies filled the dining room, coating the back of my throat like a layer of dust. I waited 5 long minutes, letting the poison steep. I picked up the steaming mug and walked over to the large potted fern sitting by the front window. It was Ruth's absolute favorite plant. She had nurtured it for many years. I tipped the ceramic mug and poured the black liquid directly into the soil. Jamal and I stood side by side watching the dirt. For a few seconds, nothing happened at all. Then a soft hissing sound filled the quiet room. The wet soil began to bubble, frothing with a sickly white foam. The thick green leaves of the fern drooped immediately, their edges curling inward and turning a toxic yellow. The hidden roots were burning away right before our eyes. I dropped the empty mug onto the floor. It shattered into a dozen pieces. The loud sound echoed through the house just like a gunshot. My son had left me a cup of pure death. He was flying to Vegas in first class, expecting to come back to a sad funeral. He wanted to bury me and take my throne without working a single day for it. I looked down at Jamal, and I stood up completely straight. My back pain vanished into thin air. The tired, senile old man they thought I was died right there in the dining room. "Go get your tablet, Jamal," I said, my voice vibrating with a new power. "We are not ordering pizza tonight. We are going to get to work." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my encrypted cell phone. I bypassed the standard contacts and dialed a secure number that I had not used in 5 long years. I was going to secure my perimeter. I was going to call the sharks and prepare a brutal welcome party for when my ungrateful son returned home. The glass shards crunched under my Italian leather shoes, but I did not bother sweeping them up. The broken ceramic was a perfect reminder of the war that had just been declared in my own home. I pulled my encrypted cell phone from my pocket, the one I kept charged for emergencies, and walked to the heavy oak desk in my study. The tired old man act was officially over. My back was straight, my mind was sharp, and my blood was running incredibly hot. I pressed a sequence of numbers that I had memorized a decade ago. It was a direct line to an old associate named Silas. Silas used to test the chemical shipments coming through my ports, making sure the cartels were not smuggling product in my freight. He was not a traditional doctor with a clean white coat. He was a shadow, a man who answered the dirty questions that the police could not. The secure line clicked open and a gruff voice answered the call. "Talk," Silas said, his voice gravelly and low. "It is Marcus," I replied, my tone hard and completely flat. "I have a major problem in Atlanta, Silas. I need a rapid spectrum analysis on a botanical compound, and I need it completely off the books tonight." Silas paused the heavy silence, stretching over the encrypted connection. "You have not called in 5 years, Marcus," he finally whispered. "It must be a matter of life and death." "It is exactly that," I told him, looking out the large window at the high iron gates of my estate. "I'm sending a trusted courier to your underground lab right now. The sample is highly toxic, so handle it with extreme caution." "Consider it done," my friend Silas answered, and the line immediately went dead. I walked back into the dining room where Jamal was standing perfectly still. He was watching me with those big brown eyes, waiting for my next command. I grabbed a pair of latex gloves from the kitchen pantry and carefully scooped the remaining dry tea leaves from the glass jar, dropping them into a heavy plastic evidence bag. I sealed it tight, making sure not a single speck of the poison escaped. This was the ultimate murder weapon, the physical proof of my son's absolute betrayal. I walked to the hidden wall safe behind my bookshelf and pulled out a thick stack of emergency cash. I counted out 10 crisp $100 bills and called my private security firm, the one that guarded my commercial warehouses downtown. Within 20 minutes, a black armored SUV pulled up to my front gates. A massive man in a tailored dark suit stepped out and walked briskly to my front door. I handed him the sealed bag and the stack of cash. "Take this directly to Silas," I ordered, my voice leaving no room for questions or delay. "Do not stop for anything. Do not look inside the bag, and do not tell a single soul where you went tonight." The man nodded sharply, taking the deadly package and vanishing into the humid Atlanta night. I turned back to my massive house, locking the heavy steel deadbolts and activating the military-grade perimeter defense system. Solid steel shutters rolled down over the ground floor windows, locking into place with a heavy, satisfying clack. The bright green lights of the motion sensors flickered to life, sweeping across the expansive front lawn. My home was no longer a quiet retirement retreat. It was a fortified bunker, and I was the commanding general preparing for a siege. I looked down at Jamal, who was clutching his tablet to his chest. He was taking in the sudden transformation of the house and the shocking transformation of his grandfather. I was no longer the frail man who sat quietly while Kendra insulted him. "Listen to me very closely, Jamal," I said softly, kneeling down on the hardwood floor so I was eye level with the brave little boy. "We are going to play a very dangerous game now. Your mother and father think they have won the lottery, but they have absolutely no idea who they are fighting. I need you to be my eyes and ears inside this house. Can you do that for me?" Jamal nodded his head slowly, a fierce determination replacing the raw fear in his eyes. He tapped a quick message on his digital tablet and held the glowing screen up for me to read. "I will help you, Grandpa." He had typed his spelling perfect and his intent clear. "Good," I said, standing back up and adjusting my expensive watch. Because before we trap them in their own lies, I need to know exactly why they decided to cross the lethal line. I need to know how deep this financial rot goes before I tear their world apart. I walked to the kitchen counter and poured 2 glasses of cold water from the fridge. I drank mine in one long gulp, letting the chill settle the burning anger in my stomach. I handed the other glass to Jamal, and he took it with both hands, drinking slowly. The air conditioning hummed in the background, but the atmosphere was thick, heavy, with the weight of the dark secrets we were about to uncover. My massive logistics empire was built on flawless information. I never moved a single shipping container without knowing exactly what was inside it, who paid for it, and where it was going. I applied that exact same brutal logic to my own family. If Andre was desperate enough to poison his own father, he was hiding a massive, crushing debt. He was a weak man, and weak men only take desperate measures when the vicious wolves are already scratching at the door. I needed to see his personal ledger. I needed to find the paperwork that he was hiding in this very house. I looked down the long, shadowed hallway toward the closed wooden door of the home office. It was a room I had generously given to Andre, hoping he would use it to build a legitimate business. Instead, he kept it locked at all times, treating it like a secretive vault for his failures. "Come on, Jamal," I whispered, gesturing for him to follow me down the hall. "We have some serious investigating to do, and we do not have much time before the toxicology results come back from the lab." We walked down the long hallway, the heavy silence of the house pressing against my shoulders. I stopped in front of the locked wooden door of the home office, but before I reached for the brass handle, Jamal tugged on my sleeve. He looked up at me, his small chest heaving with a deep hidden pain. I knelt down on the hardwood floor, bringing my eyes level with his. "What is it, son?" I asked gently, my voice barely a whisper in the empty house. Jamal swallowed hard, tears welling up in his big brown eyes. He typed furiously on his tablet, his small fingers shaking violently. He held the bright screen up for me to see. "It is about Grandma Ruth," he had written. My heart skipped a beat, a heavy dread settling in my stomach. The doctors had told me that Jamal lost his voice from the trauma of finding her body. They said it was a tragic accident, a slip on the loose carpet runner. I looked at the boy, realizing the terrible truth was much darker than a simple fall. "You can speak to me, Jamal," I said softly, resting my large hand on his trembling shoulder. "You do not have to type anymore. Your mother is not here to hurt you." Jamal took a ragged breath, the sound breaking the silence of the hallway. He opened his mouth, his voice raspy from 4 years of disuse but filled with a heartbreaking clarity. "Grandma did not fall," he whispered, tears spilling over his cheeks. "Mommy pushed her." The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the wind straight out of my lungs. I closed my eyes, a wave of pure agony crashing over my soul. My beautiful Ruth, my partner of 40 years murdered in her own home. Tell me exactly what happened. I rasped, my voice thick with a dangerous rising fury. Jamal wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, the dam finally breaking. "Mommy was yelling at Grandma," he said, his voice gaining a desperate strength. "I was hiding behind the big plant on the landing. Grandma was holding some bank papers and she was very angry. She told Mommy that she knew about the stolen money and she was going to call the police." I felt the blood drain from my face. Ruth had mentioned finding some discrepancies in the bank accounts just a few days before she died. I had told her to leave it alone, that I would look into it. It was the biggest mistake of my entire life. "And then what happened, Jamal?" I asked, my fists clenching so tight, my nails dug into my palms. Mommy screamed at her. Jamal cried, the memory tearing him apart. "And then she used both hands and she pushed Grandma down the stairs." I saw it, Grandpa. I saw her fall. I pulled the boy into my arms, holding him incredibly tight, rocking him back and forth. The image of Kendra, that vicious parasite, putting her hands on my wife, burned itself into my brain. It was not just greed. It was a cold-blooded execution to protect her lavish, unearned lifestyle. But why did you stay silent, son? I asked, pulling back to look at his tear-stained face. Why did you not tell the police? Because Daddy saw it too, Jamal sobbed, his small body shaking with grief. Daddy came running up the stairs and he saw Mommy standing there. He started crying, but Mommy grabbed his face. She told him that if he called the police, she would tell them he did it. She told him he would go to jail and lose all the money. My own son. My own flesh and blood had sold his mother and her life to avoid the consequences of his pathetic choices. He had traded justice for a few more years of fake wealth and empty luxury. And Mommy saw me hiding. Jamal continued, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper. She grabbed my arm so hard it bruised. She said if I ever made a single sound, she would push me down the stairs too. She said she would send me to a dark place where nobody would ever love me. Daddy just stood there, Grandpa. He just watched her do it. I felt a coldness settle into my bones, a freezing, absolute certainty that changed who I was forever. The father in me died on that hallway floor. The grandfather remained fiercely protective, and the logistics warlord returned, demanding total destruction. I wiped the tears from Jamal in his face, my own eyes completely dry, burning with a lethal focus. You are the bravest boy I have ever known. I told him, my voice completely steady, stripped of all warmth except for him. You carried this terrible secret for 4 long years just to survive. But you do not have to survive anymore, Jamal. Now we conquer. I stood up, towering over the locked door of the office. The anger inside me was not chaotic. It was perfectly organized, highly efficient, and absolutely deadly. Kendra thought she could murder my wife, terrorize my grandson, and poison my tea, all while spending my hard-earned money. She thought I was a blind, senile fool. But they had made one fatal miscalculation. They had left the old lion alive in his own den. Wipe your eyes, Jamal, I said, reaching into my pocket. I pulled out a thin piece of stiff metal wire, a trick I learned from a warehouse foreman decades ago. It is time to see exactly what your father is hiding in this room. It is time to collect the receipts. I slid the stiff metal wire into the keyhole of the heavy oak door. It was a simple tumbler lock, the kind of cheap hardware Andre would trust to hide his miserable life. 40 years on the Atlanta freight docks teaches a man many useful things, and picking a careless lock was one of them. I felt the pins catch on the wire, applying a gentle pressure with my thumb. The lock gave way with a loud, satisfying click. I pushed the door open and a wave of stale air hit my face. The room smelled of sour whiskey, expensive but discarded cologne, and the undeniable stench of pure desperation. I flipped on the brass desk lamp, casting a long yellow shadow across the room. This used to be my personal study, the place where I built my commercial real estate empire, calculating profit margins and coordinating massive fleets of cargo trucks. I had given this room to Andre, hoping the mahogany walls would inspire him to become a real man. Instead, he had turned my sanctuary into a graveyard of bad decisions. The expensive Persian rug was stained, covered in crumpled takeout wrappers and empty glasses. Stacks of unopened mail littered the massive desk, threatening notices with bright red borders peeking out from the envelopes. A man who ignores his mail is a man who is running out of time, I muttered, shaking my head in disgust. Jamal walked into the room behind me, stepping carefully over the trash. He pointed a small finger toward the far wall, where a large framed painting of a racehorse hung completely crooked. "Good eye, Jamal," I whispered, stepping over to the wall. I pulled the heavy wooden frame aside, letting it rest on the floor. Behind the canvas, a steel wall safe sat flush against the plaster. It was a digital keypad model, the exact kind they sell at cheap hardware stores, meant to make weak men feel powerful. I stared at the glowing green keypad, calculating the odds. Andre was not a complicated man, and he was certainly not a creative one. He would never use a random string of numbers because his lazy brain would forget them. He would use a date, something burned into his memory. I thought about Kendra and her birthday, but Andre was too selfish for that. I thought about Jamal, but Andre barely looked at his own son. And then a cold realization hit me. He would use the date of his biggest bailout, the day he realized his father would always clean up his mess. August the 14th, 2010. I said out loud, the memory tasting bitter on my tongue. It was the day I drove to the Fulton County Jail with $20,000 in cash to bond him out after a reckless driving charge. I reached out my hand, my thick fingers hovering over the glowing keys. I typed in the numbers 81410. The digital lock beeped twice a high, sharp sound, and the heavy steel bolts retracted with a loud clank. I grabbed the metal handle and swung the heavy safe door wide open. I expected to find a few $1,000s in emergency cash or maybe some stolen jewelry that Kendra had hidden away. Instead, the safe was packed to the brim with tightly bound folders, rubber bands snapping under the pressure of thick stacks of paper. It was a physical mountain of financial ruin stuffed into a tiny steel box. I reached into the dark cavity, pulling out the first heavy folder. I dropped it onto the messy desk, clearing a space among the empty liquor bottles with a sweep of my arm. I opened the thick leather cover, pulling a pair of reading glasses from my breast pocket. I slipped the glasses onto my face, and my eyes scanned the top document. The numbers printed on the page were staggering, printed in thick, angry red ink. This was not a simple credit card bill or a missed car payment. This was a detailed, catastrophic ledger of complete losses. I flipped through the pages, my heart beating with a slow, heavy rhythm. The logistics manager in me, the man who balanced ledgers worth millions, recognized the pattern immediately. Andre had been bleeding money at an incredible, impossible rate. My offshore accounts were protected by layers of corporate lawyers, but my own son could not even manage a simple household budget. His fake wealth was built on a crumbling foundation of debt. I looked at Jamal, who was standing quietly by the desk, watching my face for a reaction. "Your father is not a businessman, Jamal," I said, my voice completely devoid of any pity. "He is a fool who thought he could buy the world with money he never earned." I reached back into the safe, pulling out another massive stack of documents. The deeper I dug into the steel box, the darker the secrets became. They were planning to kill me for an inheritance, but the inheritance would not even cover the damage he had done. He was a drowning man, grabbing onto my neck, trying to drag me down into the deep water with him. But I knew how to swim, and I knew how to survive a storm. I laid the papers out on the mahogany wood, preparing to dissect the financial corpse of my only son. Every single page was a betrayal, a printed receipt of his massive, pathetic failures. And I was going to read every single one before I executed my final judgment. I spread the first stack of papers across the mahogany desk, smoothing out the wrinkled edges with my heavy hands. The printed logos at the top of the pages were not from respectable banks or legitimate investment firms. They were printouts from offshore sports books and shady online gambling websites. I adjusted my reading glasses, letting my eyes scan the catastrophic columns of red ink. Andre had been betting on everything from professional football games to overseas basketball matches. He was dropping $10,000 on a single weekend, chasing a massive payout that never actually arrived. The losses compounded month after month, creating a suffocating avalanche of debt. He was not an investor. He was a degenerate gambler throwing away his future on a spinning roulette wheel. Jamal stood perfectly still beside the desk, watching my face harden into a mask of pure disgust. I flipped to the final summary page of the gambling ledger, and the total number made my stomach churn. Andre had lost over $300,000 in just the last 6 months alone. He had drained his own savings, maxed out his credit cards, and destroyed any chance of a legitimate life. But weak men do not just stop when they run out of their own money. They start looking for a fresh victim, someone they can bleed completely dry to cover their desperate tracks. I reached back into the cold steel safe, my fingers brushing against a thick, expensive envelope tucked all the way in the back corner. I pulled the heavy envelope out into the lamplight, and the embossed logo of a major life insurance company caught my eye. My hands were perfectly steady, but a cold, dark dread settled heavily over my broad shoulders. I slid the thick document from the envelope, unfolding the crisp pages onto the cluttered desk. It was a comprehensive life insurance policy naming me, Marcus Washington, as the primary insured individual. I scanned down to the payout amount, and the bold numbers screamed right back at me. $2 million payable upon my sudden or accidental death. The sole beneficiary of this massive fortune was my ungrateful son, Andre. I traced my thick finger over the bottom of the last page, where my own signature was supposed to be. Someone had tried to copy my handwriting, mimicking the sharp loops and bold strokes that I had used to sign 1,000 shipping manifests. But the pressure was entirely wrong, the blue ink applied with a nervous, trembling hand. It was a pathetic, obvious forgery. Andre and Kendra had sat in this very room practicing my name over and over, plotting my execution on a piece of legal paper. I looked at the date the policy was issued, and the final puzzle piece locked firmly into place. The policy had a mandatory waiting period of 30 days before the massive payout became fully active. Today was exactly day 30. The timing of their lavish Vegas trip was not a coincidence at all. They had waited patiently, counting down the miserable days on a calendar until the $2 million policy was completely valid. The exact moment the clock struck midnight on the 30th day, they had packed their luxury bags, handed me a jar of poison tea, and walked out the front door. They expected the toxic leaves to slowly stop my heart, perfectly mimicking a natural, tragic heart attack in a frail old man. They would return from their expensive vacation, shed a few fake tears at my funeral, and collect a massive check to wipe away their filthy gambling debts. I dropped the forged document onto the desk, feeling a profound, terrifying shift inside my soul. In the logistics business, when a massive shipment goes missing, you do not panic. You secure the scene, you trace the paperwork, and you immediately find the rat who sold you out. My son was the rat, and he had sold his own father for a gambling debt. A son stealing from a father is a tragedy, but a son murdering a father for a payout is an unforgivable act of total war. I looked at Jamal, who was staring at the bold numbers on the insurance paper, unable to comprehend the absolute evil written in black and white. They priced my life at $2 million, Jamal. I whispered, my voice echoing in the quiet study. They think my 40 years of hard work can be erased with a forged signature and a cup of bitter water. Jamal looked up at me, his brown eyes filled with a fresh wave of terror, understanding that the people who were supposed to protect him were nothing but ruthless monsters. I placed my heavy hand on top of the forged insurance policy, pressing it flat against the smooth wood. "Do not be afraid of them, son," I said, a cold, predatory smile slowly touching my lips. "Because they made one massive, fatal mistake. They forgot that I am the one who taught Andre how to sign his name. And tonight, we are going to change all the rules." I pushed the insurance policy aside, letting it slide across the polished wood, and reached my thick arm back into the cold steel vault. My fingers brushed against the very back wall, touching a rigid black leather folder. It was hidden beneath a stack of old tax returns buried deep, where a coward hopes nobody will ever look. I pulled it out into the yellow light of the desk lamp, and the air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I flipped the heavy cover open. Inside there was no bank logo and no official state seal. It was a typed contract, brutal and simple, drafted by men who do not use courtrooms to settle their disputes. It was a loan agreement from an entity called the Vanguard Syndicate. I knew that name from my days on the shipping docks. They were not bankers, they were ruthless street enforcers, the kind of men who break bones for a missed interest payment. The numbers on the page made my jaw clench tight. $500,000 borrowed in cold, hard cash with a staggering interest rate that compounded every single week. Andre had taken money from sharks to pay off his online gambling losses, digging a catastrophic hole that no normal man could ever escape. But the loan amount was not the ultimate betrayal. The true knife in my back was the document stapled directly underneath the contract. I turned the page, and my breath caught in my throat. It was a quitclaim deed, a legal document transferring the title of a property. I stared at the address printed in bold black ink. It was my address. It was this exact house, the sprawling Atlanta estate that I built with my own 2 hands, the home where I raised him, the home where my beautiful Ruth had lived and died. Andre had forged my signature again, transferring the deed from my name into his name just 6 months ago. And then he had immediately handed that stolen deed over to the Vanguard Syndicate, using my 40 years of hard work as collateral for his pathetic street debt. He had been walking around this house acting like the king of the castle, knowing perfectly well that ruthless criminals held the actual keys. I felt a blinding, white-hot rage wash over my vision. He had not just poisoned my tea, and he had not just stolen my legacy. He had invited the devil right to my front door. If he failed to pay that $500,000, the syndicate would not wait for a court eviction. They would come in the dead of night, they would throw me out onto the street, and they would take everything I owned. I looked down at the bottom of the loan agreement, searching for the terrifying deadline. Andre had scribbled a frantic note in the margin, his handwriting messy and panicked. The deadline was tomorrow. They were coming for the money, or they were coming for the house, in less than 24 hours. That was why Kendra was so desperate, and that was why Andre was sweating through his expensive silk shirts. They needed me dead tonight, so the insurance payout would trigger immediately, allowing them to pay off the syndicate before the enforcers arrived to break their legs. They had traded my life to buy themselves a bloody ticket to Vegas, leaving me alone in a house that I technically no longer owned. I slammed my heavy fist down on the mahogany desk, making the empty liquor bottles rattle and shake. Jamal jumped back, his small shoulders hitting the bookshelf. I took a deep breath, forcing the violent storm inside my chest to calm down. I could not afford to lose control, not when my grandson was watching and not when the wolves were already circling the perimeter. "Come here, Jamal," I said softly, waving my large hand. He stepped forward, his eyes wide and fearful, staring at the black folder on the desk. "Your father did a very foolish thing," I told him, pointing a thick finger at the forged deed. "He gave our house away to some very bad men. He thought he could outsmart them, and he thought he could outsmart me. But a man who builds an empire on lies will eventually get crushed by the truth." Jamal typed quickly on his tablet, his fingers flying across the glowing glass. "Are the bad men coming here?" he asked, holding the screen up to my face. I looked at the boy, and I did not lie to him. "Yes, Jamal," I said, my voice completely flat and deadly serious. "They are coming to collect their money. But they are going to find a very different man waiting for them." I took the forged deed, the insurance policy, and the gambling ledgers, folding them carefully and sliding them into my deep pockets. These were not just pieces of paper anymore. They were my heavy artillery, the weapons I would use to absolutely destroy my son and the vicious woman he married. But before I could close the heavy steel safe, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was not a call. It was a silent alert from my perimeter security system. The motion sensors at the front gate had just been tripped. I walked swiftly to the window, pulling the heavy curtain back just a fraction of an inch. A black unmarked SUV was idling right outside my iron gates. The headlights were completely off, but the street lamp illuminated two massive figures stepping out of the vehicle into the humid Atlanta night. They were not wearing police uniforms and they were not delivering mail. They were wearing dark leather jackets, and they walked with the heavy, arrogant swagger of men who came to collect a bloody debt. The Vanguard syndicate was not waiting for tomorrow. They smelled blood in the water, and they had come early to claim their prize. I let the curtain fall back into place, plunging the study back into shadow. I looked at Jamal, and I pulled my polished, cold steel handgun from the hidden holster at my waist. "Go upstairs to my bedroom," Jamal, I ordered, racking the heavy slide with a loud metallic clack. "Lock the door from the inside, hide under the bed, and do not make a single sound until I come get you. The guests have arrived early, and it is time for the man of the house to introduce himself." Jamal did not hesitate for a single second. He turned and sprinted silently up the grand staircase, his bare feet making absolutely no sound on the thick carpet. I waited at the bottom of the stairs until I heard the heavy click of my bedroom door locking, securing my only reason for living. Once the boy was safe, the cold reality of the moment settled completely over my mind, and the old logistics warlord took total control. The heavy pounding started a minute later, shaking the thick oak of my front door. It was not a polite knock, but a violent rhythmic banging meant to strike fear into whoever was cowering inside. They expected to find Andre sweating and begging for a few more days, or maybe they expected a terrified old man ready to surrender his home to a gang of street thugs. They were severely mistaken. I walked down the hallway, my footsteps slow and deliberate on the hardwood. I held my polished steel pistol in my right hand, letting it rest comfortably against my side, the weight of the metal grounding me. I did not bother looking through the peephole. I simply unlatched the heavy deadbolts, turning the brass locks one by one, and pulled the massive door wide open. Two men stood on my front porch, bathed in the yellow glow of the security lights. They were built like brick walls, wearing cheap leather jackets that barely contained their massive shoulders. The taller one had a thick, ugly scar running down his neck, and the shorter one cracked his knuckles, looking at me with absolute contempt. "Where is Andre?" the tall one barked, trying to step past me into the foyer. "He owes the Vanguard syndicate a lot of money, and we are here to collect the keys to this property right now." I did not step back, and I did not flinch. I raised my right hand just enough so the bright porch light caught the cold, gleaming steel of my weapon. I leveled the dark barrel directly at the center of his chest, my finger resting lightly against the trigger. "Andre is not here," I said, my voice completely flat and deadly calm. "He is currently flying to Vegas, drinking expensive champagne entirely on my dime. But you gentlemen do not need to stand out in the humid heat. Come inside, wipe your feet on the mat, and have a seat in my formal living room." The two enforcers froze, their arrogant smirks vanishing instantly into the humid night air. They looked down at the heavy pistol, and then they looked right into my eyes. I was not trembling, and I was not shouting. I was giving them a simple, lethal invitation. Men who break legs for a living always respect a man who is willing to take a life without blinking. The tall one swallowed hard, raising his large hands just an inch, showing me he was not reaching for a weapon. "We do not want any trouble, old man," he muttered, his tone losing all of its previous aggression. "We just work for the boss, and the boss holds the legal deed to this house." I stepped aside, gesturing with my left hand toward the formal living room. "I know exactly who holds the forged paperwork," I replied, keeping the gun perfectly steady on his chest. "Now walk inside and sit down on the leather sofa. If either of you reaches for a pocket, I will put a bullet right through your knee before you can even take a breath. Do we understand each other?" They nodded slowly, stepping very carefully over the threshold. They wiped their heavy boots on the mat, suddenly very respectful of my property, and walked stiffly into the living room. They sat down on the expensive leather sofa, looking completely out of place among the antique furniture and fine art. I followed them inside, kicking the front door shut with my heel. I stood in the center of the room, keeping my distance, establishing complete dominance over the space. I did not offer them a glass of water, and I did not offer them a smile. "You came here to take my home," I stated, pacing slowly in front of them. "My son Andre borrowed $500,000 from your boss, and he used a fake signature to hand over this estate as collateral. He thought he could steal my legacy to pay for his pathetic gambling addiction before the deadline tomorrow." The shorter enforcer shifted nervously on the couch, keeping his eyes locked strictly on the barrel of my gun. "Look, mister," he said, his voice cracking slightly under the pressure. "We do not know anything about a fake signature. We just know the debt is due tomorrow, and Andre is hiding from us." "I know he is hiding," I said, stopping my pacing and staring them down. "Because Andre is a coward running from a vicious storm that he created himself. But you boys are incredibly lucky tonight. You walked into a trap expecting to slaughter a sheep, and you found the wolf waiting instead. I am Marcus Washington, and I do not tolerate unpaid debts in my city." I reached into my left pocket with my free hand and pulled out the thick stack of $100 bills that I had retrieved from the safe earlier. I tossed the heavy bundle of cash onto the glass coffee table. It landed with a loud, heavy thud right in front of their faces. The enforcers stared at the money, their eyes widening in pure shock. It was $10,000 in crisp, untraceable cash. "That is a down payment for your time tonight," I told them, my voice dropping to a dangerous rumble. "I'm not going to shoot you, and you are not going to take my house. Instead, we are going to do some real business. I want you to call your boss right now and tell him Marcus Washington wants to buy a massive debt." The two massive enforcers stared at the stack of cash on the glass table, completely paralyzed by the sudden shift in power. The taller man swallowed hard, his eyes darting from the money to the heavy pistol still resting casually in my right hand. He slowly reached into the inner pocket of his cheap leather jacket, keeping his movements highly visible, and pulled out a burner phone. "Make the call," I commanded, gesturing with the barrel of my weapon. "And put it on speaker so we can all hear the negotiations." He dialed a short sequence of numbers, his thick fingers trembling slightly under the intense pressure of the room. The phone rang twice, a hollow digital sound that echoed in the quiet living room before a deep, raspy voice answered the line. "Is it done?" the voice demanded, sounding like gravel crushing under a heavy truck tire. "Do you have the keys to the Atlanta estate?" "There is a slight complication, boss," the tall enforcer stammered, sweating profusely under the bright chandelier light. "Andre is not here, but his father is waiting for us. He has a gun, and he just threw 10 grand on the table." A heavy silence stretched across the phone line, thick with an unspoken threat. "You let an old man pull a gun on you," the boss growled, his anger rising through the tiny speaker. "Take the house and break his legs if he gets in the way." "That would be a catastrophic mistake for your business," I interrupted, stepping closer to the phone. "My name is Marcus Washington, and I built the largest independent freight network on the eastern seaboard. I do not run from debts, and I certainly do not let street thugs take my property. Who the hell do you think you are?" The boss snapped back, clearly unaccustomed to being challenged. "Your pathetic son signed the deed over to the Vanguard syndicate. That house belongs to me tomorrow morning. My son forged my signature to steal my legacy," I replied, my voice completely smooth, layered with the absolute confidence of a self-made millionaire. "If you try to evict me, I will tie you up in federal court for a decade, and I will freeze every single asset associated with your syndicate. But I'm a businessman, and I prefer clean, profitable solutions." "I am listening," the raspy voice said, his curiosity finally overriding his violent pride. "What exactly are you offering, old man?" "I am offering to buy the paper," I stated, pacing slowly around the terrified men on my sofa. "I will buy Andre and his massive debt entirely from you." I will wire the $500,000 principal directly into your offshore accounts by sunrise, plus a flat 10% convenience fee for your trouble. You get your money clean, you avoid a messy war with a logistics billionaire, and you walk away fully satisfied. The silence on the line returned, but this time it was the silence of a predator calculating a massive profit. You have that kind of liquid cash sitting around the boss, asked a hint of genuine respect, creeping into his tone. I have that kind of cash sitting in my checking account, I fired back, not breaking my intense stare. Have your accountant look up Washington Freight and Logistics, check the credit rating and check the corporate liquidity. You will see that I can buy your entire syndicate and sell it for parts before lunch. I heard the muffled sound of typing through the speakerphone, followed by a low, appreciative whistle. Well, Marcus. The boss chuckled, the tension instantly leaving his voice. It seems your son vastly underestimated the size of your wallet. We accept your generous offer. The debt is officially yours the moment the wire transfer clears my bank. Excellent, I said, lowering my pistol and tucking it back into my waistband. And these two gentlemen in my living room are keeping the $10,000 on the table as a personal bonus for their professional behavior tonight. The two enforcers looked at me, their jaws practically hitting the expensive Persian rug. They had walked into my home expecting a violent brawl, and they were leaving with more cash than they made in a year of breaking bones. You are a very dangerous man, Marcus, the boss noted before ending the call with a sharp click. I looked at the two large men who were now carefully scooping the crisp bills off the glass table, stuffing them into their pockets with trembling hands. They stood up slowly, nodding their heads in a strange mixture of absolute fear and deep gratitude. They did not look at me like a victim anymore. They looked at me like I was their employer. You boys have a safe drive home, I told them, walking over to the heavy oak front door and pulling it open. And if you ever see my son Andre on the streets of Atlanta, you remind him that he does not owe the Vanguard Syndicate a single dime. You remind him that he owes his very soul to his father. We will tell him, Mr. Washington, the tall one promised, practically bowing as he rushed out the door. Thank you for the generous business. I shut the massive door behind them, throwing the heavy steel deadbolts back into place. The physical threat of the mob was gone, completely neutralized by the overwhelming power of organized wealth. I had just spent over $500,000 of my secret fortune, but I'd purchased something infinitely more valuable than real estate. I had purchased absolute total control over my treacherous son. I walked back to the bottom of the grand staircase, looking up toward the locked bedroom where my grandson was hiding. Jamal was safe, and the perimeter was completely secure, but the night was far from over. I needed to move the rest of my empire, shielding it behind layers of legal armor before Kendra and Andre could launch their next attack. I pulled my encrypted phone from my pocket, ready to summon from the most ruthless lawyer in the state of Georgia. I looked up the grand staircase and I called out to my grandson. It is safe now, Jamal, I said, my voice echoing up to the locked bedroom. You can come down now. I heard the heavy click of the brass lock, and Jamal peeked his head over the wooden railing. He walked slowly down the carpeted steps, clutching his digital tablet tight against his small chest. The bad men are gone, he typed, holding the glowing screen up for me to read. Yes, Jamal, I answered, placing a heavy hand on his shoulder. They work for us now, but we have a much bigger problem to solve before the sun comes up. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my encrypted phone for the third time tonight. I dialed a number that I kept reserved for corporate warfare. It was the direct line to my personal attorney, Reginald Vance. Reginald was not the kind of lawyer you hired for a simple contract dispute. He was a ruthless legal shark, a man who wore custom-tailored suits and destroyed massive corporations before his morning coffee. He answered on the second ring, his voice crisp and completely awake despite the late hour. Reginald, I said, pacing back into the formal living room. I have a catastrophic family emergency, and I need you at my Atlanta estate right now. Bring your encrypted laptop and bring your corporate seals. I will be there in 20 minutes. Marcus, Reginald replied, not asking a single useless question. Make a pot of strong black coffee. The line went dead. I looked at Jamal, who was watching me with absolute trust. Go to the kitchen, son, I instructed gently. Get us some cold water and stay close to me. We are about to build a massive fortress, and we are going to put your name right on the front gate. 20 minutes later, a sleek silver sedan pulled up the long, sweeping driveway. Reginald walked through my front door carrying a heavy leather briefcase. He was a tall man, impeccably dressed, with a mind sharper than broken glass. He walked into the living room, took one look at the shattered ceramic mug on the floor, and sat down at the large dining table. He opened his laptop, the screen glowing brightly in the dim room. Talk to me, Marcus. Reginald commanded, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. I placed the stack of evidence directly in front of him. I showed him the forged life insurance policy, the desperate gambling ledgers, and the fake quitclaim deed. I told him about the poison tea, and I told him about the horrifying confession that Jamal had just shared about my late wife. Reginald did not gasp, and he did not show a single ounce of pity. Pity is useless in a war. He simply absorbed the brutal information, processing the legal implications of a son trying to execute his own father. They are trying to liquidate you, Marcus, Reginald stated, his voice cold and analytical. They are waiting for you to die so they can steal the $2 million and escape the syndicate. But since you just bought the debt, they are entirely trapped. We can call the district attorney right now and have them arrested for attempted murder before their flight lands in Vegas. No, I said, shaking my head firmly. If we call the police right now, they will hire expensive defense lawyers with my own money. They will drag this out in the courts for years, claiming it was a massive misunderstanding. I want a clean, absolute sweep. I want them to destroy themselves completely and totally. Reginald smiled, a thin, predatory smile that did not reach his eyes. You want to control the demolition? He noted, tapping his expensive pen against the table. I respect that strategy, Marcus. So what is your next move? They want my assets, I said, leaning forward and resting my heavy hands on the table. They want this estate and they want my cash. So as of tonight, I want Marcus Washington to own absolutely nothing. I want to be a ghost in the financial system. Reginald nodded slowly, his fingers flying across his keyboard with incredible speed. We will create an irrevocable grantor trust, he explained, his eyes scanning the digital documents. We will name it the Jamal Heritage Trust. Tonight we transfer the title of this Atlanta estate, every single stock portfolio, and all of your offshore bank accounts directly into this new entity. You will legally own nothing, Marcus. The trust will hold the keys to the entire kingdom. And who will manage it? I asked, watching the complex legal armor forming on his screen. I will serve as the sole trustee, Reginald replied, looking right at me. If Andre and Kendra try to file any paperwork or claim a single dime of your wealth, they will hit a solid brick wall. They cannot sell a house that you do not own. They cannot drain accounts that are completely empty. They will be stealing the keys to an empty vault. Do it. I commanded, a wave of profound relief washing over my tired bones. Move every single penny. For the next 2 hours, the quiet dining room turned into a high-speed command center. Reginald executed massive financial transfers, rerouting millions of dollars through secure encrypted channels. He drafted the heavy trust documents, sealing my entire life's work behind impenetrable layers of corporate law. I signed my name dozens of times, my signature bold and confident, nothing like the pathetic forgery my son had attempted. By the time the sun started to rise over the Atlanta skyline, the massive transfer was fully complete. Marcus Washington was officially a broke man on paper, but I was infinitely more powerful than ever before. The shield was securely in place. Now I needed to forge the deadly sword. We have secured the perimeter, Marcus. Reginald said, closing his laptop with a sharp snap. Your legacy is safe for the boy. But what happens when they realize the money is completely untouchable? They are not going to realize it, I replied, standing up and walking over to the large mirror hanging in the hallway. Because I am going to give them exactly what they want. They want a helpless, dying old man. I am going to become the perfect victim. I looked at my strong reflection in the glass. I let my broad shoulders slump forward, entirely collapsing my posture. I relaxed my facial muscles, letting my jaw hang slightly open, and I forced my right hand to tremble with a violent, rhythmic shake. I let a vacant, confused stare glaze over my sharp eyes. Reginald stood behind me, watching my shocking physical transformation. If I did not know any better, Marcus, he whispered, I would call an ambulance for you right now. It is not an act. Reginald, I said, dropping the confused face for just a single second, my eyes burning with a lethal fire. It is a preview of the hell they tried to put me in. Call my private doctor and have him summon them back from Vegas immediately. Tell them my mind is completely gone, the trap is officially set, and it is time to invite the rats back into the maze. The heavy front door swung open, hitting the wall with a loud, violent thud. I sat on the leather sofa, wrapped tightly in a thick wool blanket, even though the Atlanta sun was beating against the drawn living room blinds. I had spent the last 2 hours preparing for this exact moment, perfectly tuning the muscles in my face and practicing the rapid, violent tremor in my right hand. Jamal sat on the thick rug right by my feet, coloring on his digital tablet, acting as my silent, brave little sentinel. Kendra marched into the foyer, dragging a massive piece of designer luggage behind her, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated anger. Her fake tan was fresh, and she was wearing a loud, sequined casino top. Completely inappropriate for a sudden medical emergency. We had to cancel the absolute best dinner reservations for this, she shrieked, kicking her heavy suitcase toward the grand staircase. I swear to God, Andre, if your father is just faking a stomachache to ruin my vacation, I'm going to lose my entire mind. Andre walked in right behind her, carrying 2 more heavy bags, his face pale and dripping with nervous sweat. He dropped the luggage onto the hardwood floor, breathing heavily, completely crushed by the massive syndicate debt hanging over his head. Dr. Bennett said it was a severe cognitive collapse, Kendra Andre panted, wiping his wet forehead with the back of his hand. He said his mind is completely gone. We had to come back. We need the insurance money before tomorrow or those street thugs are going to kill me. I closed my eyes halfway, letting my jaw hang completely slack, creating a thin, humiliating line of drool at the corner of my mouth. Pride is a dangerous luxury in a war, and I threw my pride entirely out the window. I had to become the pathetic, broken shell of a man that my daughter-in-law so desperately wanted to see. Andre rushed into the living room, stopping dead in his tracks when he finally saw me. I looked terrible, a heap of defeated old bones staring blankly at the dust floating in the air. Dad, Andre called out, his voice cracking with a strange mixture of fake concern and very real panic. Dad, it is me. It is Andre. We flew back as fast as we could. I slowly turned my head toward him, keeping my neck stiff and jerky, like the gears in my spine were rusting away. I did not lock eyes with him. I looked right through him, staring at the blank wall behind his head, letting my right hand shake violently against the armrest of the sofa. Who are you? I mumbled, pitching my deep voice high and thin, making it sound like dry crushing leaves. Are you the man from the bank? Andre flinched, stepping back as if I had physically struck him across the face. Pops, he whispered, reaching out a trembling hand. Stop playing around. It is Andre, your son. I pulled away from his hand violently, shrinking back into the deep leather cushions, widening my eyes in fake absolute terror. No. I whimpered, shaking my head with clumsy, uncoordinated motions. You cannot have my house. You are the bank man. Ruth. I yelled out, calling for my murdered wife, letting my voice crack with pathetic sorrow. Ruth, the bank man is here to take the house. Kendra stepped into the living room, her high heels clicking sharply against the floor. She did not rush over to comfort me, and she did not look sad. She stood over me, crossing her arms, and a slow, predatory smile stretched across her bruised, fake face. She looked at me exactly the way a vulture looks at a dying animal in the desert. Well, Kendra said, her voice dripping with a cold, absolute satisfaction. The doctor was not exaggerating at all. His brain is completely, entirely fried. Andre looked at her, his hands shaking at his sides. What do we do, Kendra? He asked, his voice weak and completely broken. He does not even know his own name. He thinks I'm a bank teller. Kendra leaned down, invading my personal space, smelling heavily of stale airplane alcohol and cheap casino smoke. She stared right into my eyes, searching for any sign of the intelligent logistics billionaire she used to fear. Do you know who I am, old man? She asked, speaking incredibly loudly and very slowly, like she was talking to a deaf, stupid animal. I looked at her, maintaining the blank, vacant stare, but inside my blood was boiling like a violent volcano. I raised my shaking hand, pointing a crooked finger directly at her face. You are the loud lady, I mumbled, shrinking away from her toxic perfume. You are the lady with the bitter water. I do not want the dark water. It makes my chest burn, and it makes me very dizzy. Kendra stood up completely straight, practically glowing with a dark, twisted triumph. She grabbed Andre by his silk shirt sleeve, pulling him a few steps away toward the hallway. They lowered their voices to a harsh whisper, but 40 years on the noisy shipping docks had trained my ears to hear a pin drop in a hurricane. I heard every single treacherous word. It is the poison tea, Andre Kendra hissed, her voice vibrating with pure murderous excitement. The toxicity hit his weak nervous system so much faster than we originally planned. The poison attacked his brain. We do not even have to wait for his heart to completely stop anymore. He's legally incompetent right now. Andre looked back at me, a brief, pathetic flash of guilt washing over his weak features before the heavy, crushing weight of his syndicate debt completely erased it. Are you absolutely sure? He whispered back. What if he suddenly snaps out of it and calls his corporate lawyers? He's not snapping out of anything, Kendra snapped back, her sharp acrylic nails digging deeply into his arm. Look at him, Andre. He's a complete vegetable. This is the absolute best-case scenario for us. We do not have to wait for the death certificate to get the cash. We can file for an emergency conservatorship tomorrow morning. We can take total legal control of his entire estate before the mob enforcers even realize we are back in town. I sat there on the soft leather couch, listening to my own flesh and blood plan to legally strip me of my entire life. I let a wet, hacking cough rattle deeply in my chest. I reached for the glass of cold water that Jamal had placed on the side table. I deliberately let my shaking hand knock against the glass, spilling the freezing water all over my shirt and my thick wool blanket. Oh no! I cried out, letting my bottom lip tremble like a frightened toddler. I made a huge mess. Ruth is going to be so mad at me. I made a mess! Jamal immediately rushed over, playing his silent part with absolute perfection. He grabbed a clean towel from the table, dabbing at my wet shirt, with a look of intense, silent worry, shielding me from their vicious stares. Look at this pathetic mess, Kendra sneered, looking down at me with absolute unfiltered disgust. He cannot even hold a simple glass of water without ruining the furniture. Call that cheap lawyer right now, Andre. Tell him we need the total power of attorney papers drawn up immediately. We are taking every single thing he owns by tomorrow afternoon. The cold, wet fabric of my shirt clung to my chest, but I sat perfectly still on the leather sofa, maintaining the hollow, empty stare of a broken man. Kendra paced the floor with a terrifying, predatory energy. She pulled her expensive smartphone from her designer purse, her sharp acrylic nails tapping loudly against the glass screen. She dialed a number, holding the phone tight to her ear, looking at me like I was a winning lottery ticket that was finally ready to be cashed. Dr. Evans Kendra said, her voice instantly dropping into a fake, desperate tone. "Yes, it is Kendra Washington. We had to fly back from Vegas early. My father-in-law has taken a catastrophic turn for the worse. His mind is completely gone and he cannot even hold a glass of water without spilling it everywhere." I listened to her weave her vicious lies, my heart beating with a slow, heavy rhythm. She was setting the legal stage, preparing to lock me away in a dark facility where I would never be heard from again. "Yes, exactly." Kendra continued, nodding her head vigorously as if the doctor could see her through the phone. "We need you here immediately. We need the official evaluation, and we need the affidavit of incompetence signed today. I have the absolute power of attorney papers ready to file with the probate court tomorrow morning. Thank you, Dr. Evans." She ended the call with a sharp click and slipped the phone back into her bag. She looked at Andre, who was still standing in the hallway, sweating profusely under the crushing weight of his massive syndicate debt. "Dr. Evans is on his way," Kendra announced, a triumphant, wicked smile stretching across her face. "He is going to sign the medical certificate. Once we have his legal signature, we take total control of the entire estate and we pay off your stupid gambling debt before the mob breaks your legs." Andre let out a long, shaky breath, running his trembling hands over his face. "Are you absolutely sure about this, doctor?" Andre asked, his voice weak and pathetic. "What if he realizes the old man is poisoned and he calls the police right now?" Kendra rolled her eyes, letting out a sharp, cruel laugh. "Dr. Evans does not call the police, Andre," she sneered. "He is a private physician for people who pay entirely in cash. He does not ask questions, he just signs the paperwork and he takes his fat envelope. Now go upstairs and get the cash from the safe." I kept my head down, pretending to play with the loose threads of my thick wool blanket, acting completely oblivious to their murderous plot. Less than an hour later, the doorbell rang with a sharp, piercing sound. Andre opened the door, and a small, nervous man walked into my formal foyer. He was wearing a wrinkled suit, and he carried a battered leather medical bag that looked like it belonged in a cheap pawn shop. He smelled heavily of artificial peppermint and stale cigarette smoke. "Where's the patient?" Dr. Evans asked, his shifty eyes darting around my expensive living room, assessing the value of my antique furniture instead of my failing health. "He is right here on the sofa," Kendra said, rushing over to stand beside him, putting on her fake, concerned face. "He's been exactly like this since we walked through the door. He does not know what year it is, and he keeps calling for his dead wife." Dr. Evans walked over to me, opening his leather bag with a loud snap. He pulled out a cold stethoscope and pressed it roughly against my chest, right through my wet shirt. He listened for exactly 3 seconds. It was a pathetic, insulting examination. It was not nearly enough time to hear my strong, steady heartbeat, but it was plenty of time to pretend he was doing his job for the bribe. "His heart rate is slightly elevated," Dr. Evans mumbled, pulling the stethoscope away. He pulled a small pen light from his pocket and flashed the bright beam directly into my eyes. I did not blink, and I did not look away. I stared straight through the blinding light, focusing my eyes on a tiny crack in the ceiling, plaster letting my vision blur naturally. "Mr. Washington," Dr. Evans said loudly, treating me like a deaf child. "Can you hear my voice? Can you tell me your full name?" I let out a long, wheezing breath, making a strange whistling sound through my teeth. I turned my head very slowly, looking at the corrupt doctor with a totally vacant, confused expression. "My name is Captain," I rasped, letting my voice crack and tremble. "The massive cargo ship is leaving the dock. Where is my shipping manifest? Tell the men to load the heavy crates." Kendra let out a dramatic fake sob, pressing her face into her hands. "You see, doctor?" she cried out, her voice echoing in the large room. "He's talking about the shipping docks again. He has not worked in logistics for over 5 years. His brain is completely destroyed. Dr. Evans nodded his head, pulling a thick clipboard from his bag. He clicked his pen, scratching aggressively against the paper. Severe cognitive regression, Dr. Evans noted aloud, writing down his fraudulent diagnosis. Rapid onset dementia, likely caused by a series of mini strokes. It is very common in men of his advanced age. He requires 24-hour supervision, and he is a severe danger to himself. I wanted to reach up, grab him by his wrinkled collar, and throw him straight out my front window. But I had a much bigger game to play. I let my head loll back against the leather cushions, closing my eyes and pretending to fall into a deep, exhausted sleep. Legally speaking, Dr. Evans continued, his voice cold and clinical. He no longer has the mental capacity to make any decisions regarding his health, his vast finances, or his estate. I'm signing the certificate of total incapacity right now. He placed a heavy legal document on the glass coffee table. He uncapped his pen and signed his name with a messy flourish, stamping his official medical license number right at the bottom. There it is, Dr. Evans said, handing the paper directly to Kendra. He is officially incompetent. You need to file this with the court first thing tomorrow morning. Kendra snatched the paper from his hand, her eyes absolutely glowing with pure venomous greed. She looked at that signature like it was a solid gold ticket. Thank you so much, doctor, she whispered, her voice trembling with dark excitement. Andre walked the corrupt doctor back to the front door, slipping a thick white envelope of cash into his hand. As the heavy door clicked shut, Kendra turned around, staring at my sleeping body on the couch. We did it, Andre. She cheered, a wicked laugh escaping her lips. We finally did it. The money is entirely ours tomorrow. I knew I had to drop the heavy bait right now. If they thought they had won, they would relax and they would wait for tomorrow. I needed them desperate, active, and completely distracted so Jamal could set the final trap. I needed to send them on a wild, destructive goose chase right inside this very house. I opened my eyes just a tiny fraction, staring blankly at the far wall. I let out a low, painful groan, clutching my blanket tight against my chest. The walls, I muttered, making sure my voice was loud enough for them to hear. They cannot look in the walls. Do not tell the bank men. Kendra froze in her tracks, her expensive high heels stopping dead on the hardwood floor. She turned her head very slowly, her eyes narrowing into sharp, calculating slits. What did you just say? She asked, stepping back toward the sofa. I looked past her, pretending to be lost in a deep, paranoid delusion. I hid it all, I whispered, letting a thick glob of spit gather at the corner of my mouth. I do not trust the banks. The gold bricks are in the basement. Heavy gold hidden right behind the plaster walls. Andre walked back into the living room, frowning in confusion. What is he talking about now, Kendra? He asked, wiping his sweating hands on his pants. Kendra did not look at him. She stared at me, her chest heaving with a sudden intense gold fever. He is talking about hidden money. Andre, she whispered, her voice tight and desperate. He worked in high-level logistics for 40 years. He moved millions of dollars in untraceable cash and commodities. He always said he hated the banking system. Andre scoffed, shaking his head. He is just a crazy old man, Kendra. He is hallucinating. You do not know that. Kendra snapped, spinning around to face her husband. People do not lie about hidden treasure when their brains are dying. He just gave us a massive secret. Think about it, Andre. Millions of dollars in solid gold bars hidden right down in our own basement. We would not even have to wait for the insurance check to clear. We could pay off the syndicate tonight. She looked toward the heavy wooden door that led down to the dark, unfinished basement. Her eyes were wide, completely consumed by the blinding promise of unearned wealth. Go get the heavy sledgehammers from the garage. Andre, Kendra ordered, a manic energy taking over her entire body. We are going to tear those basement walls completely down until we find every single brick. I closed my eyes again, letting a soft, rhythmic snore escape my throat. I lay perfectly still on the leather couch, listening to the heavy, frantic footsteps of my son running to fetch the tools of his own total destruction. The greedy rats had just taken the biggest piece of cheese, and they were about to tear my foundation apart, searching for a ghost that I had invented entirely in my own mind. The sound of a heavy sledgehammer hitting solid concrete is a very distinct and violent noise. It travels up through the floorboards and rattles the expensive crystal glasses in the dining room cabinets. I lay perfectly still on the leather sofa, listening to the absolute destruction of my own basement, while the grandfather clock ticked away the late hours of the night. Down in the dark, my son and his greedy wife were sweating through their designer clothes, swinging heavy steel tools with the desperate, frantic energy of complete fools. I opened my eyes just a fraction, looking toward the hallway. It was well past 2 in the morning, but the gold fever had infected their brains, completely overriding their physical exhaustion. "Keep swinging!" Kendra screeched, her voice echoing up through the metal heating vents. "It has to be behind the structural wall. The old man said it was hidden behind the bricks. Do not stop right now, we are so close to the millions." I heard the loud, painful clang of metal striking solid stone, followed immediately by a heavy, exhausted groan from my son. "My hands are completely blistered, Kendra." Andre panted, his voice echoing with pathetic weakness. "We have been smashing these walls for over 4 hours. We have torn down the entire east side of the foundation. There is absolutely nothing here but cheap insulation and dry dirt. Maybe the crazy old man was just hallucinating." "Do not call him crazy until we find the gold." Kendra snapped back, the sharp sound of a crowbar ripping through drywall, filling the air. He was completely lucid for just a single second. People do not invent buried treasure when their brains are melting. "Swing the hammer again, Andre, or I swear I will leave you to the syndicate thugs tomorrow." I let out a quiet, dark chuckle, burying my face deep into the thick wool blanket. I had given them a massive, impossible task, and they were tearing my house apart to complete it. Let them dig, I thought to myself. Let them exhaust their weak muscles until they finally realize they are standing in a grave of their own making. But I was not the only one awake in the dark house. I heard a very soft, barely audible rustling sound coming from the top of the grand staircase. I turned my head just an inch, peering through the shadows of the living room. Jamal was creeping down the carpeted stairs, moving like a tiny, silent ghost in the night. He was clutching his digital tablet under his left arm, and his face was set in a mask of pure, cold determination. I wanted to sit up and tell him to go back to his safe room, but the look in his big brown eyes stopped me completely cold. He was not a terrified little boy anymore. He was a soldier operating deep behind enemy lines, and he had a very specific mission to execute. Jamal glided past the living room, not making a single sound on the hardwood floor. He headed straight for the large kitchen pantry, right next to the open basement door. I strained my ears, listening to his tiny movements. I heard the soft, faint squeak of the pantry door opening, followed by the heavy plastic glug of a large bottle being tipped over. It was the massive, economy-sized jug of cooking oil that I used for frying fish on the weekends. Jamal was not making a late-night snack. He was pouring the thick, slippery liquid directly onto the top wooden steps of the basement staircase, completely coating the center treads in an invisible, lethal layer of grease. He was laying a brutal minefield for the monsters working down in the dark. He set the empty plastic jug down without a sound and silently crept back up the grand stairs, disappearing into the shadows of the second floor. I smiled a genuine warm soul, feeling an incredible surge of pride for my brave grandson. The bait was taken, and the trap was officially set. Down in the basement, the violent smashing finally came to a complete stop. I heard the heavy steel sledgehammer drop onto the concrete floor, ringing out with a loud, defeated clang. "I am entirely done, Kendra." Andre gasped, his lungs clearly burning for air. I cannot lift my arms anymore. There is no gold down here. It is just dirt and broken pipes. We wasted the entire night." Kendra let out a raw, furious scream of total frustration, the sound echoing wildly up the staircase. "Fine," she yelled, her voice dripping with venom. "Fine! We will stop for tonight. But tomorrow we are tearing down the west wall until this entire house collapses on top of us. I need a hot shower and I need a strong drink to wash this filthy dust off my skin." I heard their heavy, exhausted footsteps trudging toward the wooden stairs. Andre was walking first, his expensive leather shoes scraping lazily against the concrete. He reached the bottom step, breathing heavily, completely unaware of the slippery doom waiting right at the top. "Move out of my way, Andre." Kendra snapped, shoving past him with her usual arrogant force. "I am not waiting behind you." She stomped her foot down on the third step from the top, planting her designer heel right into the thickest pool of Jamal and his cooking oil. The laws of physics are an absolute unforgiving judge, and they do not care about fake wealth or designer clothes. Her foot shot straight out from under her, moving faster than a striking snake. She did not even have the time to scream before gravity took total control. Her legs flew up into the air, her arms flailing wildly in the dark, grasping for a wooden handrail that she could not reach. She came down incredibly hard, her face smashing directly into the sharp wooden edge of the staircase. The sound was absolutely sickening. It was a wet, violent crunch of bone and cartilage cracking loudly against the solid timber, followed by the heavy thud of her body sliding all the way back down to the concrete basement floor. Total silence hung in the house for exactly 2 seconds, and then the screaming finally started. It was not a normal scream of surprise. It was a high, piercing wail of pure, vain agony. It sounded like a siren tearing through the quiet Atlanta night. "My face," Kendra shrieked, her voice gargling with a thick, wet sound. "My nose is completely shattered. Oh my God, look at all the blood." Andre started shouting in a blind panic, his footsteps rushing back down the stairs to help her. "Kendra, are you okay?" he yelled, his voice cracking with fear. "What just happened to you?" "I slipped." Kendra screamed, spitting blood onto the concrete. "You absolute idiot, there is grease all over the top stairs. Someone put slippery oil on the stairs." I lay on my leather sofa, staring up at the dark ceiling, and a wide, genuine smile spread across my face. I did not move a single muscle, and I did not rush to offer my help. I just listened to her violent, painful humiliation, knowing that my grandson had just drawn the very first drop of blood in our righteous war. The cursing from the basement was a beautiful symphony of pain and rage. I lay on the leather sofa perfectly still as the heavy footsteps finally began to climb the wooden stairs. Andre was dragging his wife up the steps, grunting under her weight. "My nose is completely destroyed," Kendra sobbed, her voice muffled and thick with fresh blood. "Look at what this rotting house did to me, Andre. Look at what he did to me." "He did not do anything," Andre stammered, his voice shaking with pure panic. "You slipped on some spilled oil, Kendra. He has been sleeping on the couch the entire time." "It is this cursed house," she shrieked, stumbling into the hallway. "I hate it. I hate him. Get me a wet towel right now before I bleed all over my designer clothes." I heard them rushing into the downstairs bathroom, the bright fluorescent lights clicking on. The water from the sink ran on full blade, splashing violently against the porcelain basin. I opened my eyes, and I slowly turned my head, peering through the dark living room toward the open bathroom door. Kendra was leaning over the sink, holding a white towel to her face. The bright red blood was soaking rapidly through the thick cotton fabric, dripping down her chin and staining her expensive sequin top. She pulled the towel away for just a second and looked at her reflection in the big mirror. Her nose was clearly broken bent at a sharp, unnatural angle. Her eyes were already swelling shut, turning a deep, angry shade of purple and black. The beautiful, arrogant woman who had walked into my house earlier was completely gone. She looked exactly like the vicious, ugly monster that she truly was on the inside. "Oh my God," Kendra wailed, staring at her ruined face. "I look like a freak. I look like a complete monster." "It will heal, Kendra," Andre whispered, hovering behind her like a pathetic shadow. "We will get you to a plastic surgeon in Vegas as soon as we have the cash." "Vegas?" Kendra screamed, spinning around to face him. Her voice was raw, echoing off the bathroom tiles with a terrifying manic energy. "We are not waiting for Vegas, Andre. We are not waiting for the slow poison to stop his old heart. I'm completely done digging in the dirt, and I'm done waiting for him to die in his sleep." "What are you saying?" Andre asked, stepping back into the hallway. "We have the medical certificate. We just need to wait for the poison to finish the job." "I'm saying the plan is officially changed," Kendra hissed, storming out of the bathroom and pointing a bloody finger directly at my sleeping body on the sofa. "I'm not spending another single night in this house. Tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock sharp we are dragging him out of here. But the court date for the conservatorship is not until next week." Andre argued, his face pale and sweating. "We cannot just throw him out on the street." "We are not throwing him on the street," Kendra said, a wicked, evil light shining in her swollen eyes. She walked closer to the living room, keeping her voice low but vibrating with lethal intent. "We are taking him to a lawyer first thing in the morning. We are going to force him to sign the total power of attorney papers immediately." "He cannot even hold a pen," Andre whispered, looking at me with a pathetic mixture of guilt and greed. "He does not know his own name, Kendra." "Then we will hold the pen for him," she snapped back, completely ignoring any boundary of human decency. "And if that cheap lawyer refuses to accept his signature, we will call the authorities. We will show them my broken face, Andre." Andre frowned, completely confused by her twisted logic. "Show them your face," he repeated. "Yes, you absolute coward." Kendra smiled, showing her bloody teeth. "We will tell the police that the old man is violent. We will tell them that his dementia makes him incredibly dangerous and that he attacked me tonight. We will use my broken nose as absolute physical proof. Lie to the police." Andre stammered, shaking his head. "Kendra, that is a serious crime. We already murdered your mother," she whispered fiercely, stepping right into his face. "Do not pretend to have a moral compass now. Look at my face, Andre. This is our golden ticket. We tell the state that he is a violent threat. They will lock him in a psychiatric ward instantly under heavy sedation. Once he is locked behind those padded doors, he will never see the light of day again. We sell the house, we pay off your vicious syndicate, and we take the rest of the cash for ourselves." I lay on the sofa, keeping my breathing shallow and completely even. My own son was standing 10 feet away, listening to a plan to frame me for assault and lock me in a mental asylum. And just like he did when his mother was murdered, he did not fight back. He did not defend my honor. "Okay," Andre finally whispered, dropping his head in total defeat. "Okay, Kendra. Tomorrow morning we take him to the lawyer, and then we lock him away." "Good," Kendra sneered, turning away from him. "Now get me some heavy painkillers and pack my bags. We are leaving this dump forever tomorrow." They walked up the grand staircase, leaving a trail of bloody footprints on my expensive hardwood floor. I waited until I heard the heavy guest room door click shut, locking them inside for the night. I sat up slowly, throwing the thick wool blanket off my chest. The timeline had just violently accelerated. They were desperate, injured, and completely out of control. They were going to try and strip my wealth tomorrow morning using a sleazy lawyer and a fake assault charge. I reached into my pocket, pulling out my encrypted phone one more time. I typed a very fast, secure message to Reginald Vance. "The rats are panicking," I wrote, making sure every word was completely clear. "They are attempting a forced power of attorney tomorrow morning at 8. I will play along. Have the final trap completely ready." Reginald replied in less than 10 seconds. "The cage is built. Marcus," the message read. "Let them walk right through the front door." I stood up in the dark living room, looking at the bloody spots on the floor. Tomorrow they were going to try and bury me alive. But tomorrow the entire world was going to watch them fall. The morning sun was entirely too bright, cutting through the drawn blinds of my living room like a sharp knife. I had not slept a single wink. I spent the entire night perfecting the vacant stare and the trembling hands of a broken man. I sat on the edge of the leather sofa, wearing a mismatched cardigan over my pajama shirt, waiting for my son to drag me to the slaughterhouse. Kendra stormed down the grand staircase, her expensive heels clicking with a furious, impatient rhythm. She was wearing massive, dark sunglasses, completely covering the top half of her face. A thick white bandage was taped securely across the bridge of her broken nose, and her skin was bruised an ugly yellowish purple. She looked absolutely ridiculous, but her greed was still burning hot and dangerous. "Get up, old man," Kendra snapped, her voice muffled and nasal from the severe swelling. "We have a very important appointment this morning, and you are going to sign some very important papers." I let my head bob slightly, keeping my mouth hanging open, drooling just a tiny bit onto my collar. I reached out a shaking hand, grasping at the empty air. "Where's my boat?" I mumbled, pitching my voice high and confused. "I need to check the cargo manifest. The men are waiting for me on the docks." Andre walked into the room looking like a man walking to his own execution. He grabbed my arm, his grip loose and completely unconvincing. "Come on, Pops." Andre sighed, refusing to meet my eyes. "We are just going for a short ride in the car. We are going to see a nice man about the house." They pulled me up from the sofa, practically dragging my heavy feet across the expensive hardwood floor. I shuffled along, letting my knees buckle just enough to make them carry my dead weight. We walked out the front door into the sweltering Atlanta heat, and they shoved me into the back seat of Andre and his least luxury SUV. The drive was completely silent, filled only with the sound of Kendra hissing in pain every time the heavy car hit a small bump in the road. We pulled into a rundown strip mall parked right between a discount liquor store and a cheap dry cleaner. The neon sign above the dingy glass door read, "Law Offices of Barry Stone, Estate, Planning, and Rapid Notary." It was exactly the kind of sleazy, low-rent operation that desperate criminals use to steal from the elderly. "Get him out of the car," Andre Kendra ordered, adjusting her dark sunglasses to hide her ruined face. "And make sure he does not trip on the pavement. I am not paying for a hospital visit today." Andre opened my door, pulling me out into the blinding sunlight. I stumbled intentionally, scuffing my expensive leather shoes against the dirty concrete, leaning heavily on his weak shoulder. We walked into the cramped, musty waiting room. It smelled like stale cigarette smoke and cheap copy machine ink. A greasy man in a poorly fitting brown suit was waiting for us in a tiny conference room. He had a severe comb-over and sweat beaded heavily on his forehead despite the rattling air conditioner in the window. This was Barry Stone, a man who would gladly sell his own mother for a stack of $100 bills. "Mr. Washington Barry Stone," said, standing up and extending a damp, clammy hand. "It is a pleasure to finally meet you. Please have a seat right here at the table. We have a lot of complex legal paperwork to get through today." I stared at his outstretched hand, acting completely terrified of it. I shrank back into Andre, pulling my cardigan tight around my chest. "I do not want the bitter water," I whimpered, looking around the tiny room with wide, panicked eyes. "The lady makes the water taste like old pennies. I want to go home now." Barry Stone slowly lowered his hand, looking at Kendra with a very nervous, hesitant expression. "Mrs. Washington?" Barry said, wiping the sweat from his upper lip. "Dr. Evans sent over the medical certificate of incompetence, but your father-in-law seems highly agitated today. A voluntary transfer of power requires him to at least hold the pen and understand the basic concept of the signature." "He understands it perfectly fine," Kendra hissed, slamming her expensive designer purse onto the cheap folding table. "He's just acting difficult because his brain is rotting away. We do not have time to play games, Mr. Stone. My husband is facing a massive financial deadline today, and we need total legal access to the estate accounts right now. Barry Stone swallowed hard, intimidated by her vicious, violent energy. He pushed a massive stack of legal documents across the table, tapping his cheap pen against the signature line. "This is a general durable power of attorney," Barry explained, his voice trembling just a tiny bit. "It grants your son Andre and your daughter-in-law, Kendra, complete and unrestricted access to all bank accounts, real estate holdings, and liquid assets. If he signs this paper, you own everything by noon." Andre leaned down right next to my ear, his breath smelling of stale coffee and pure fear. He put the cheap plastic pen directly into my shaking right hand. "Listen to me, Pops," Andre whispered, using a sickening sweet tone, exactly like a man talking to a stupid dog. "You just need to sign your name right here on the dotted line. Just write Marcus Washington, exactly like you taught me when I was a little boy. If you sign the paper, we will go get you a big bowl of chocolate ice cream." I sat perfectly still in the hard plastic chair, holding the cheap pen in my trembling fist. My own son, a man I had protected for 36 years, was trying to bribe me with a bowl of ice cream to steal millions of dollars and hand my life over to a mob syndicate. He thought my 40 years of brutal logistics experience and my massive empire could be bought for a scoop of cheap vanilla. "Ice cream," I repeated, letting a thick string of drool fall freely from my open mouth. "Chocolate ice cream with the sweet sprinkles." "Yes, Pops." Andre smiled, a pathetic, desperate look of relief washing over his sweating face. "All the chocolate ice cream you want. Just put the pen on the paper and sign your name." I lowered the plastic pen toward the legal document, letting my hand shake violently, hovering the tip just an inch above the crisp white paper. Kendra leaned over the table, her breath hitching in her throat, her greedy eyes locked entirely on the signature line. She was already spending the money in her wicked mind. She thought she had completely won the war, but she did not know that the final bomb was about to detonate right in her bruised and broken face. I held the cheap plastic pen over the thick white paper, letting my hand vibrate with a fake violent tremor. Kendra leaned so far across the folding table that I could smell the dried blood on her thick bandages. "Sign it right now," she hissed, her voice a desperate, greedy whisper. I pressed the tip of the pen down onto the dotted line, pushing incredibly hard, almost tearing completely through the expensive legal document. I did not write the letter M, and I did not write my proud family name. I kept the pen moving in a wide, shaky arc, drawing a massive, wobbly circle that took up the entire bottom half of the page. "What is he doing?" Barry Stone asked, stretching his greasy neck to look at the paper. "He is just confused," Andre stammered, sweating through his silk shirt. "Write your name, Pops, please, just write your name." I ignored my sweating son entirely. I drew 2 dark dots right inside the giant circle, and then I added a long, sweeping curve right underneath them. It was a massive, lopsided smiley face, staring blankly back up at the 3 greedy fools in the room. I dropped the plastic pen onto the desk, and I clapped my heavy hands together, letting out a high, wheezing giggle. "Happy face," I announced, bouncing slightly in the hard plastic chair. "The happy man wants his chocolate ice cream now." The silence in the tiny conference room was absolute and incredibly heavy. Barry Stone stared at the ruined legal document, his mouth hanging completely open. "Mrs. Washington," Barry said, wiping his wet forehead with a dirty handkerchief. "I absolutely cannot accept a giant smiley face as a legally binding signature." Kendra stared at the crude drawing on the paper, and the last remaining thread of her sanity violently snapped. Her face turned a deep, terrifying shade of crimson, matching the bruised purple skin around her broken nose. The pain, the crushing debt, and the absolute humiliation of the gold hunt all boiled over into pure, unfiltered rage. She did not care about the sleazy lawyer, and she did not care about her weak husband. She only wanted to destroy the man who was keeping her from the money. You senile, useless old fool! Kendra shrieked, her voice tearing through the quiet office like a sharp blade. She lunged entirely across the small table, grabbing my wrist with her sharp acrylic nails, digging deeply into my skin. Stop playing these pathetic games and sign the paper right now. Kendra, stop it! Andre yelled, half standing up from his chair, but completely failing to physically intervene. She raised her free hand high into the air, and she slapped me incredibly hard right across the back of my trembling hand. The sound was a loud, sharp crack echoing violently off the cheap paneling of the walls. It stung my skin, a sharp, sudden pain, but I did not pull away. I sat there taking the physical abuse, knowing exactly what was happening in the room. You are completely useless, Kendra screamed, slapping my hand a second time, knocking the legal papers right off the table. Sign the paper or I swear I will leave you to rot in the street. I slowly leaned forward in my chair, letting my slumped shoulders straighten out for just a fraction of a second. The vacant, cloudy look vanished entirely from my eyes, replaced by the cold, lethal stare of a logistics warlord. I looked directly into her swollen, bruised face, biting my sharp eyes onto hers. I dropped my voice to a terrifying, steady whisper, cutting right through her manic screaming. Hit me harder, sweetheart, I whispered, my voice deep and completely lucid. The hidden security camera in the corner is recording every single second of this assault. Kendra froze completely solid, turning entirely to stone. Her mouth fell open and her wide eyes darted frantically up toward the top corner of the cramped room. Tucked high above the dusty bookshelf, a tiny black dome sat perfectly still, a small red light blinking silently in the shadows. She looked back down at me, her chest heaving with a sudden absolute terror, trying to comprehend the man sitting in front of her. Did he just speak to me? Kendra thought, panic visibly washing over her broken features. Did the old man just threaten me? But the cold, calculating billionaire was already gone. I instantly collapsed back into the chair, clutching my red, stinging hand against my chest. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing real tears to well up and spill down my cheeks. The bad lady hit me, I wailed, crying out with the loud, pathetic voice of a frightened child. The loud lady hurt my hand, Andre. I want to go home right now. Barry Stone scrambled backward, knocking his office chair into the wall. He was a sleazy lawyer, but he was not a complete idiot. He saw the physical violence, and he wanted absolutely no part of a felony elder abuse charge. Look, folks, Barry stammered frantically, gathering his blank documents from the floor. This situation is entirely too volatile for my practice. I have a legal license to protect, and I cannot be a party to this kind of physical coercion. Get him out of my office right now before I call the authorities myself. Kendra stared at me, trembling violently, trying to figure out if she was losing her own mind or if the poisoned old man was actually hunting her. Let us go, Andre. She whispered, her voice totally hollow and defeated. Grab the bags and get him out of here. Andre pulled me up from the chair, his hands shaking even worse than mine. I am so sorry, Pops, he mumbled, leading me toward the glass door. I am really sorry. We will go home now. I shuffled out into the blinding Atlanta sun, clutching my bruised hand, keeping my head down. But deep inside my chest, my heart was beating with a steady, victorious rhythm. They had failed to steal my empire, and the bad lady had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to lock her in a cage forever. The silent ride back to the estate felt like riding inside a rolling coffin. The heavy Atlanta heat pressed against the tinted windows of the luxury SUV, but the air conditioning could not freeze the pure panic radiating from the front seats. Andre gripped the leather steering wheel, his knuckles completely white, staring blankly at the road ahead. Kendra sat in the passenger seat, aggressively chewing on her thumbnail, the white bandage on her broken nose stark against her bruised skin. She was vibrating with a dangerous, erratic energy like a trapped rat looking for a way out of a burning room. We pulled through the iron gates of my massive home, the heavy tires crunching slowly on the gravel driveway. I maintained my slouched, pathetic posture in the back seat, staring out the window with a vacant expression. The grand house stood tall and completely silent, hiding the vicious war that was about to reach its final explosive climax. Andre dragged me out of the vehicle, his grip entirely devoid of any real strength. He walked me up the front steps and led me straight toward my grand bedroom on the first floor. "You need to rest, Pops," Andre mumbled, not meeting my sharp eyes. "Just lay down on the bed and try to go to sleep." He practically shoved me into the dark room, pulling the heavy wooden door shut behind me. I heard the brass lock click from the outside. They were locking me in, treating me like a prisoner in my own castle. I walked over to the edge of my large mattress, sitting down heavily, dropping the confused old man act the absolute second I was alone. I rolled my shoulders back, taking a deep, steadying breath. The legal route had completely failed them, and desperate people do not simply surrender. They double down and they escalate the violence. I reached under my thick mattress and pulled out the cheap burner phone that I'd secretly given to Jamal earlier that week. I stared at the glowing digital screen, waiting for my brave grandson to report from the front lines. Down the hallway, I could hear the muffled, frantic voices of my son and his vicious wife. They were arguing in the kitchen, their desperate tones carrying through the thick walls of the house. "We are completely out of time, Andre," Kendra hissed, her voice slicing through the quiet evening. "That stupid lawyer kicked us out and the courts will not touch him without a clean signature. The syndicate is coming for the money tomorrow morning. If we do not have the insurance payout triggered by sunrise, those street thugs are going to execute you right in the driveway." "But what else can we do, Kendra?" Andre cried out, his voice cracking with pathetic weakness. "We cannot just shoot him. The police will know it was a murder. We are not going to shoot him." Kendra snapped back, the sound of glass clinking loudly on the marble counter. "I'm brewing a fresh pot of the dark tea right now, but we are not waiting for a slow, natural decline anymore. I'm giving him a massive, lethal triple dose tonight. It will shock his weak heart instantly, and it will look exactly like a massive cardiac arrest." My encrypted burner phone vibrated silently in my hand, flashing a bright light in the dark bedroom. I looked at the screen, reading the short, terrifying message from Jamal. He was hiding perfectly under the dining room table, listening to his own parents plot an absolute murder. Code red, Grandpa Jamal had typed his spelling perfectly clear. "Mommy is making the bitter water right now. She said triple dose. She said you have to die tonight." I read the words, and a profound icy calm washed over my entire soul. The ultimate betrayal was officially confirmed. My own son was standing in my kitchen, agreeing to pump my veins full of lethal poison just to save his own miserable skin. He was not stopping her, and he was not calling for help. He was completely complicit, choosing his fake luxury life over the father who gave him everything. I typed a quick final message to my lawyer, Reginald Vance, sending it through the secure server. "They are preparing the lethal dose right now," I wrote, my thumb pressing hard against the glass screen. "Have the police staging area ready. Wait for my final signal and then kick the front door completely off the hinges." I placed the burner phone safely inside my pillowcase, pushing it deep into the soft feathers. I stood up from the bed, moving with the quiet, lethal grace of a seasoned predator. I walked into my attached master bathroom, opening my leather toiletry bag. I pulled out a thick, heavy-duty plastic storage bag, the kind used for freezing large cuts of meat. I grabbed a roll of medical tape from the cabinet, tearing off a long, sticky strip. I unbuttoned the top of my pajama shirt and carefully taped the thick plastic bag directly to my bare chest. I positioned the wide opening right below my chin, making sure it was completely hidden by the loose, draping fabric of my collar. I smoothed the shirt down, checking my reflection in the dark mirror. The hidden pouch was entirely invisible, resting securely against my skin. Next, I reached into my small shaving kit and pulled out a tiny white pill. It was not heart medication and it was not a painkiller. It was a theatrical foaming tablet, a harmless chemical prop that I had acquired years ago from a contact in the movie freight business. I slipped the small white pill underneath my tongue, being incredibly careful not to bite down on the hard, chalky shell. I walked back into the dark bedroom, climbing into the large bed and pulling the heavy comforter all the way up to my chin. I messed up my gray hair, letting my glasses slip crookedly down my nose. I closed my eyes, regulating my breathing into a slow, shallow rhythm. The stage was perfectly set, the hidden cameras were rolling, and the Grim Reaper was walking right down my hallway, carrying a steaming cup of absolute betrayal. The brass handle of my bedroom door turned slowly, letting a sharp slice of hallway light cut across the dark carpet. I lay perfectly still under the heavy comforter, keeping the small white tablet safely tucked under my tongue. Heavy footsteps entered the room, moving with an aggressive, hurried rhythm. Kendra walked right up to the edge of my mattress, holding a large ceramic mug in her bruised, shaking hands. The smell of the hot liquid was absolutely overpowering, a thick metallic stench of bitter roots and pure death completely filling the enclosed space. "Are you awake, old man?" Kendra whispered, her voice dripping with a fake sugary sweetness that made my stomach physically churn. I groaned loudly, shifting my weight against the pillows, turning my head toward her shadow. "Ruth," I mumbled, slurring my words into a pathetic, confused drawl. "Is that you, Ruth? I am so cold." "No, Marcus. It is Kendra," she snapped, her patience immediately evaporating. She sat down heavily on the edge of the mattress, the springs groaning under her weight. "I brought you a fresh cup of your special tea. You need to drink every single drop of this right now so you can finally go to sleep." I opened my eyes just enough to see her battered face in the dim light. The white bandage on her broken nose looked ridiculous, but the cold, murderous intent in her eyes was absolutely terrifying. She was looking at me like an accounting error, a simple problem that she was about to permanently erase. I reached my hands out from under the blankets, letting them shake violently in the cool air of the room. "My hands are shaking," I whined, playing the helpless victim to the absolute limit. "I cannot hold the heavy cup." Kendra let out a loud, frustrated sigh, rolling her swollen eyes. "Fine," she hissed, leaning completely over me. "I will help you drink it. Just open your mouth and swallow the tea." She brought the steaming ceramic mug right to my lips, tilting it aggressively, forcing the burning dark liquid into my mouth. I took a massive gulp of the bitter tea, letting the hot liquid pool in my cheeks, but I did not swallow a single drop. I let my head loll forward, immediately coughing violently and turning my face right into the collar of my pajama shirt. "Oops," I sputtered, letting the liquid spill entirely out of my mouth. I spat the deadly tea directly into the thick plastic bag that was securely taped to my bare chest. The loose fabric of my shirt hid the entire motion perfectly. "Watch what you are doing," Kendra shrieked, pulling the mug back so she would not spill it on her expensive clothes. "You are wasting it, you clumsy fool. Drink the rest of it right now." She forced the mug back to my mouth, tilting it even higher this time. I repeated the exact same motion, a grim, calculated dance of sipping and spitting. I took a mouthful, coughed weakly into my collar, and deposited the lethal poison straight into my hidden plastic trap. I did it 3 times completely, emptying the ceramic mug without letting a single drop of her vicious poison slide down my throat. I let my head fall back against the soft pillows, panting loudly, acting as if the simple effort of drinking had completely exhausted my failing body. "Good boy," Kendra whispered, setting the empty mug down on my nightstand with a sharp clack. She stood up from the bed, looking down at me with a terrifying, victorious smile stretching across her bruised face. "Now close your eyes and go to sleep forever." She turned around and walked toward the bedroom door, where Andre was standing in the shadows, watching the entire execution in complete, pathetic silence. I waited exactly 10 seconds, counting the heavy beats of my own heart, making sure they thought the lethal dose was finally working its dark magic. And then I bit down incredibly hard on the small white tablet hidden under my tongue. The chemical reaction was absolutely instantaneous. The theatrical pill fizzed violently, filling my entire mouth with a thick, acrid foam. It tasted exactly like bitter chalk. But to the two murderers standing in my doorway, it looked like the violent, horrific end of a dying man. I let the thick white foam bubble up past my lips, spilling heavily down my chin and soaking into the collar of my shirt. I threw my arms out wide, smacking my heavy hands loudly against the wooden headboard. I started to convulse, jerking my massive shoulders and thrashing my legs violently against the mattress. I let out a loud, gargling, choking sound, a terrifying noise of a man drowning entirely in his own fluids. "What is happening?" Andre screamed, his voice cracking with absolute terror. He rushed a few steps into the bedroom, staring at the horrific scene playing out on the bed. I did not stop. I escalated the performance, throwing my entire body weight to the right side of the mattress. I tumbled off the high bed, crashing incredibly hard onto the floor. My flailing arm struck the nightstand, knocking the heavy brass lamp entirely off the table. The lamp shattered against the hardwood floor with a deafening crash, plunging the bedroom into complete disorienting darkness lit only by the pale light spilling from the hallway. I rolled on the floor, kicking my legs wildly, arching my back in a grotesque, horrific parody of a massive cardiac seizure. The white foam continued to pour from my mouth, glowing eerily in the dim light. I scratched at the carpet with my fingernails, creating a chaotic, desperate symphony of a violent death. "Oh my God!" Andre yelled, grabbing his own hair in a blind panic. "He is having a massive heart attack, Kendra. Look at his mouth. Look at the foam." Kendra stood perfectly still in the doorway, blocking his path, watching my violent convulsions with absolute clinical detachment. "The poison is working, Andre," she stated, her voice completely cold and entirely devoid of human empathy. "The massive dose is shocking his nervous system. It is exactly what we wanted." I let out one final, ragged, choking moan, tossing my head back against the floorboards. I was not dying, but I was absolutely making sure that they believed every single terrifying second of it. The trap was springing perfectly, and the guilty rats were watching the steel jaws close right in front of their very eyes. The rough carpet scraped against my cheek as I continued my violent, chaotic dance of deception. I thrashed my heavy legs against the hardwood floor, kicking the baseboard with a brutal force that shook the entire room. The white chalky foam kept bubbling up past my lips, spilling thickly onto my chin, and soaking the collar of my pajama shirt. It tasted absolutely vile, but to the two murderers standing in my doorway, it looked like the horrific, agonizing end of a failing heart. Through the hazy, dim light spilling from the hallway, I saw the silhouettes of my own family. Andre was the first one to finally break. The sheer shock of the violent scene completely shattered his cowardly paralysis. He rushed forward, dropping heavily onto his knees right beside me, his hands hovering over my shaking body. He was entirely too terrified to actually touch me, but his face was twisted in a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. "Dad," Andre screamed, his voice cracking with a high, desperate terror that sounded almost genuine. "Oh my God, what is happening to him?" "Kendra, look at his mouth. Look at all the foam." He reached a shaking hand toward my shoulder, but pulled it back as if my skin was completely on fire. He was crying now, big heavings that violently shook his entire frame. "He is dying right in front of us." Andre wailed, his eyes wide with absolute panic. "He is having a massive seizure. We have to do something right now. Where is my phone?" I heard the frantic, desperate sound of his hands slapping against his pockets, searching for his cell phone. He pulled the glowing device out, his thick fingers trembling so badly he could barely unlock the bright screen. He was trying to summon the paramedics, trying to undo the horrific, murderous sin he had just committed in my bedroom. But a cold, sharp shadow suddenly fell entirely over us, completely blocking out the hallway light. Kendra stepped fully into the dark room. She did not run, and she did not scream in terror. She walked with the deliberate, terrifying calm of a butcher inspecting a slaughtered animal on the factory floor. "Stop what you are doing," Kendra commanded, her voice cutting through his panic like a razor-sharp blade. "Put the phone away right now, Andre." Andre looked up at her, the phone glowing brightly in his shaking hand, his face completely wet with pathetic tears. "What are you talking about?" Andre sobbed, pointing a shaking finger at my body. "Look at him, Kendra. He is foaming at the mouth. We have to call the ambulance immediately or he's going to die." Kendra bent down with terrifying speed and she snatched the phone directly out of his hand. Her movement was precise, violent, and completely absolute. She tapped the bright screen once, immediately ending the emergency call before it could even connect. "If they save him today," Kendra hissed, leaning incredibly close to his sweating face, her eyes manic and wide. "If they save him, he survives this night. And if he survives the hospital, doctors will find the poison in his blood. They will find the lethal dose, they will call the police, and we will both go to prison for attempted murder. Is that what you really want, Andre? Do you want to spend the rest of your miserable life in a tiny metal cage?" Andre looked down at me, and then he looked back up at his vicious wife, the internal conflict completely tearing his weak soul apart. "But he is my dad." Andre whispered, the last remaining fight draining entirely out of his body. "He's in terrible pain. Look at him suffering on the floor." "He is not suffering at all," Kendra stated, standing up tall and taking a step back, looking down at me with absolute chilling detachment. "His brain is completely gone, Andre. This is just his old body shutting down. It is a simple reflex, just like a chicken with its head cut off. He does not feel a single thing." I thrashed a little harder, letting out a deep, gargled moan, a sound that begged for human mercy. I arched my heavy back, my fingers clawing desperately at the carpet fibers, trying to give my son one last pathetic chance to be a real man. "Please, Kendra," Andre begged, reaching his empty hands out toward her. "Just let me make the call. Maybe it is not too late to save him." Kendra kicked his hand away, not incredibly hard, but with enough physical force to remind him exactly who was in charge of this murder. "We wait," Kendra said, pulling back her sleeve to check her expensive diamond-encrusted watch. "We wait exactly 30 minutes. That is all it takes for a heart to completely stop. Once he stops moving entirely, once his skin is cold, then we will make the phone call." 30 minutes. Andre choked out, staring at my convulsing body with absolute wide-eyed horror. 30 minutes to ensure the $2 million payout, Kendra whispered, her voice changing into a soft, seductive, serpentine hiss. 30 minutes to clear your massive syndicate debt, Andre. 30 minutes to keep this beautiful estate and save us from the violent street thugs. Think about the money, baby. Just half an hour of total silence and then we are free forever. I lay there on the floor listening to this wicked woman barter my entire life for a simple ledger balance. I felt the thick, chalky foam drying sticky on my cheek. I felt the vibration of Andre sobbing quietly, a pathetic, rhythmic sound of a weak man completely surrendering his soul to the devil. He did not fight her anymore. He did not reach for the stolen phone. He just sat there on the floor, watching me die, whispering pathetic apologies over and over again. I wanted to scream, and I wanted to sit up and grab him by his silk collar. I wanted to shake the cowardice entirely out of him. But I had to be the cargo. I had to play the dead man. The seconds ticked by, agonizingly slow. I counted them perfectly in my head, one by one, keeping time with the strong, steady beating of my own heart. The 30-minute clock had officially started, but they did not know that the countdown was actually meant for them. I lay perfectly still on the expensive hardwood floor, letting my violent, chaotic thrashing slowly come to a complete and total halt. I made my heavy limbs go entirely limp, acting exactly like a puppet with the strings suddenly cut. I let my head roll to the side facing my crying son, and I rolled my eyes entirely back into my skull, showing only the blank whites. The thick theatrical foam stopped bubbling from my mouth, drying into a crusty white mask across my chin and my wet collar. I slowed my breathing down to a barely perceptible shallow rhythm, taking tiny sips of the cool bedroom air, only when it was absolutely necessary to stay conscious. "He is stopping," Andre whispered, his voice completely hollow and devoid of any human soul. "He stopped moving, Kendra." "Do not touch him yet," Kendra commanded, her voice sharp and clinical in the dark room. "We have to wait the full 30 minutes just to be absolutely certain. We cannot risk a sudden miraculous recovery." Total silence descended on my master bedroom. A heavy, suffocating silence broken only by the pathetic sound of Andre sniffing and the distant low hum of the central air conditioning. I lay there on the carpet, trapped in a macabre performance of my own death, listening to the woman who murdered my wife, casually checking the diamond watch on her wrist. The minutes dragged by, slow and agonizing, but I kept my mind sharply focused on the ultimate endgame. I listened to their breathing, judging the depth of their absolute betrayal. 15 minutes passed, and Andre finally stopped crying. He wiped his face, staring at my still body, with a look of pure, cowardly relief. The fear of his massive syndicate debt had completely overpowered any remaining shred of love for his father. "We should start packing his expensive suits," Kendra muttered, pacing back and forth across the room. "We can sell his vintage watch collection tomorrow right after we file the death certificate. The estate lawyers will freeze the main accounts for a few days, but we can easily pawn the loose valuables to keep the street thugs happy." Andre nodded slowly, agreeing to strip my corpse before it was even completely cold. "Yes," Andre said, his voice gaining a sickening new confidence. "I know the combination to his smaller wall safe. We can empty it before the police arrive to take the body away." 25 minutes passed, and the tension in the room finally began to shift into a sick, twisted celebration. Kendra walked over to the large window, peering out through the heavy blinds, checking the quiet Atlanta street for any late-night witnesses. "The coast is entirely clear," Kendra announced, turning back toward my still body. She let out a long, heavy sigh of pure relief, and a wicked, victorious smile spread across her bruised face. "It is officially over, Andre," she whispered, walking over and placing a hand on his shaking shoulder. "We did it, baby. The $2 million is ours tomorrow morning, and the syndicate debt is completely erased forever. We are finally rich, and we are completely free from his absolute control." "We have to call the paramedics now," Andre mumbled, wiping his wet nose with his silk sleeve. "We have to tell them we just found him like this, dead on the floor from a sudden heart attack." "Yes," Kendra agreed, smoothing down her designer top, preparing for her upcoming theatrical performance. "I will do all the talking. I will cry, and I will tell them he collapsed in his sleep. Just follow my lead and keep your mouth completely shut." But before Kendra could even reach for the stolen cell phone, a faint, distant sound drifted through the closed window. At first, it was just a low, rising whisper on the humid night wind. But to my trained ears, it was the absolute sweetest music I had ever heard in my entire life. It was the sound of multiple police sirens screaming down the highway, growing louder and more furious with every single passing second. "Do you hear that?" Andre asked, his head snapping up toward the window. "Hear what?" Kendra asked, her confident smile suddenly faltering. "Sirens," Andre said, standing up on shaky legs. "They are incredibly loud, Kendra. They sound like they are coming straight toward our gated neighborhood." "It is probably just a fire truck on the main road," Kendra muttered, but a thin, sharp edge of panic was finally creeping into her voice. She rushed back to the heavy blinds, pulling them apart just a tiny fraction to look outside. The screaming sirens did not pass by the neighborhood at all. They turned sharply onto our quiet, private street, multiplying in volume until they became a deafening, terrifying roar. Suddenly, the dark walls of my bedroom were violently illuminated by bright, flashing strobes of red and blue light dancing wildly across the ceiling like a disco ball of absolute justice. The heavy screech of thick rubber tires sliding across the pavement echoed outside right in front of my massive iron gates. "Oh my God," Andre yelled, backing away from the window in pure unfiltered terror.